This is part 2 of our Civil War trip, where Debbie and I continue our quest of following my great-great-grandfather Fred Block's journey and battles of the Civil War. If you haven't seen part 1, a link to that episode is in the description below. Driving parallel to the route, the steamboats had transported the soldiers up the Mississippi River from their victory at New Madrid, Missouri. We crossed on the 92-year-old steel bridge to Cairo, Illinois, at the mouth of the Ohio River. There the transport boats carrying the soldiers had briefly stopped, letting the boys go into town, where it was reported that the store shelves were quickly emptied before they continued up the Ohio River en route to reinforce the embattled troops at Shiloh. We stopped at Fort Defiance Park, where the two mighty rivers converge. I'm standing here where the Ohio River on my right enters into the Mississippi River on my left. If we turn around this way, you can see behind me the Mississippi River Bridge. If I turn over this way, right behind me and behind the tugboats is the Ohio River Bridge. A monument here shows that the Lewis and Clark expedition spent 5 days here in 1804, teaching each other celestial navigation skills before proceeding up to St. Louis and then west on the Missouri River. The town of Cairo was named after Cairo, Egypt, but pronounced Cairo from its founding. During the 1800s, southern Illinois was sometimes called Little Egypt, because the Mississippi River and surrounding rich soil was likened to the Nile River Delta. Leaving Cairo, we immediately crossed the 83-year-old Ohio River Bridge into Kentucky, driving the 40 miles to Paducah, where the Tennessee River flows into the Ohio. When we arrived in Paducah, we visited the historic riverfront. This is the port of Paducah. The Wisconsin 5th Battery would have come up on the riverboat. They came up the Ohio River from Cairo, Illinois, and then came and turned to the right to go up the Tennessee River to Pittsburg Landing near Shiloh. Debbie and I thoroughly enjoyed our visit to the beautiful downtown riverfront, including the 3 city blocks of vibrant murals hand-painted onto the flood wall. Leaving Paducah, we followed the Tennessee River south, stopping to camp for the night in Land Between the Lakes National Recreation Area. I looked from our peaceful campsite across the water and wondered what it was like for my great-great-grandfather, one of many young men aboard a steamboat churning upstream through the night into Tennessee. They were headed to the battlegrounds around Shiloh Church, where tens of thousands of young men like them had just passed into eternity. The troops arrived at Pittsburg Landing on April 21st, 2 days after leaving Missouri, and proceeded a few miles further upriver to Hamburg Landing, where they disembarked to take a position 7 miles south of Hamburg. On May 3rd, Captain Penny of the 5th Wisconsin Battery wrote, "I was over to the battleground at Pittsburg Landing. There the stench was horrible. The dead soldiers, some of their heads sticking out of the ground, and others arms and legs. So shallow were they buried." Debbie and I camped at Pickwick Landing State Park, not far from where the 5th Wisconsin Battery had camped. We drove to the Shiloh National Battlefield, visiting the museum, battlefields, Pittsburg Landing, and the Shiloh Church. Behind me is the old log Shiloh Church. It was actually destroyed during the Civil War, but they rebuilt it with 150-year-old logs to an exact replica. On the other side, they've built a newer church. It still looks pretty old, out of rock and brick, as Shiloh Methodist Church, and they still hold services there today. Major General Henry Halleck, who oversaw all federal troops in the Western Theater, came to Pittsburg Landing from his headquarters in St. Louis to personally command the combined forces. The armies totaled approximately 120,000 men. They began pressing forward to Corinth, Mississippi, 22 miles to the southwest of Shiloh, where 65,000 rebels were dug in behind earthen fortifications. Halleck considered Corinth to be one of the greatest strategic points in the war. What made Corinth important was the intersection of the two major railroad lines. Running north and south, the Mobile and Ohio Railroad connected the Gulf of Mexico to the northern states. Running east and west was the Memphis and Charleston Railroad that at that time was the only continuous line connecting the Mississippi River to the Atlantic Ocean. These railroads were used by the rebel army to transport troops, supplies, and weapons. The stakes were high. Confederate P.T. Beauregard, who commanded the Southern Army at Corinth, stated, "If defeated here, we will lose the Mississippi Valley and probably our cause." As we drove the roads to Corinth, we followed the approximate route that great-great-grandfather Block and the 5th Wisconsin Battery took with Pope's Army of the Mississippi. Rain reminded me of reports that I read of constant rain and flooding that hampered the efforts of Federal troops. One man complained that their drinking water was full of tadpoles and wiggletails. Typhoid, malaria, mumps, and measles plagued both Union and Confederate troops. Historians say that as many Confederate soldiers died of disease at Corinth as did in the battle at Shiloh. It has been said that there were three forces in the Civil War: the North, the South, and disease. Disease took more lives than the other two. Soldiers also had to contend with muddy swampland. One soldier wrote, "Woe to the man or beast that was unfortunate enough to step or fall off the roads. That was the last of them. They sunk out of sight in a very short time in the quicksands." General Pope's Army of the Mississippi, including the 5th Wisconsin Battery, on the left wing of all Union forces, was the first to begin advancing towards Corinth. They encountered more combat than the other divisions, including a battle at Farmington, Mississippi, where the 5th Battery was assigned a position at a bridge to prevent rebel soldiers from crossing. Coming into the small town of Farmington, I began to look for the location where the battle took place. I stopped and asked for directions at City Hall if they knew anything about where the battle was fought here in Farmington. And the people in there didn't know, but they called someone for me that was familiar with the history and gave me directions, and even one of the workers from City Hall led me on the way out here, and this field behind me is where they had the main battle at Farmington. Although Federal troops now outnumbered the Confederates at Corinth almost 2-1, they expected a long, bloody battle since the Johnny Rebs were well dug in behind their earthworks. Throughout the night, Union soldiers could hear rebel soldiers cheering as trains arrived and departed throughout the night, giving the impression that reinforcements were arriving. However, when morning came, they found that Corinth had been completely evacuated by the Confederates. The artillery had been replaced with so-called Quaker guns, logs that had been painted black to resemble the big guns. The Corinth Interpretive Center has a museum with exhibits of the siege and a battle that occurred 4 months later when Confederates tried unsuccessfully to take back the city. They have reconstructed some of the earthworks used at that site. Just down the road is the Crossroads Museum and Historic Depot. It sits just a few feet from the railroad intersection that was so highly coveted by both North and South. This is the railroad junction that the battles were fought over, both Shiloh and Corinth and the Battle of Farmington. Union trying to gain control, and did gain control, of the main east-west and north-south railroad lines. Across the nation, newspapers reported the victory at Corinth. Captain Penny wrote home saying, "The whole Secesh Army has left Corinth and we are in hot pursuit." Leaving Corinth, we drove 20 miles south to Boonville, where members of the 5th Battery accompanied a brigade pursuing the Confederates. We found a historical marker alongside the downtown railroad tracks telling how the Union Brigade entered the town at daybreak on May 30th, 1862. They destroyed the depot, a large train filled with munitions and equipment, and captured 2,000 sick and wounded Confederates. Our next stop was a town named after the Battle of San Jacinto in Texas, but the locals pronounce it Jacinto. The 5th Battery spent much of the summer in this area skirmishing with Confederates attempting to regain northern Mississippi. They are now under the command of Union General Jefferson C. Davis, not to be confused with the Jefferson Davis that was president of the Confederacy. William Ball wrote of a severe conflict that lasted for 2 days on June 11th and 12th, with the Union troops finally getting the upper hand on the second day. He reports, "They were unable to withstand our bayonet charge and fled like sheep before our steady advance. On July 12th, The 5th Battery lost their first member. Private John Ross, 24 years old, died after a short but severe illness. On August 23rd, disease took another comrade, 2nd Lieutenant Almond Smith, who left behind a young wife and infant child. The 5th Battery was near Iuka, Mississippi, when they received orders to march 200 miles to join General Don Carlos Buell's Army of the Tennessee near Nashville, opposing Confederate forces under General Braxton Bragg. They soon found their march would be even longer, as Confederate forces had invaded Kentucky, and there was a race to reach Louisville before Bragg's army. Don't miss the next episode, where we follow their route along the historic Natchez Trace to Nashville, and then on to Kentucky, where their fiercest battle yet would take place in the Chaplain Hills at Perryville, a battle that would effectively determine the future of Kentucky and perhaps the whole war. We appreciate you viewing this video and ask that you click the thumbs up button and subscribe. Leave a comment and let us know if you enjoyed it.